The United States has over 1 million confirmed COVID-19 cases. That's a third of the global total, which is by now over 63,000 deaths. And while the death rate in America is still dangerously high and increasing, many states are relaxing distancing measures. Good morning. It's May 1st, 2020. I'm Zank from Bennett Data Science for today's update on the COVID-19 recovery graphs, where you'll see how states and countries are recovering from COVID-19. So here are the headlines. 2 days ago, on April 29th, the United States saw its largest day-over-day death rate since COVID-19 came to America. Most of the states hardest hit by COVID-19 are increasing death rates today. So let's start at the international view, the world view, and you can see that the United States in this yellow, or rather orange line, are not showing a decrease in number of new deaths per day. This orange line is the number of new deaths per day smoothed. The red is the underlying actual data. And the blue curve is the number of total deaths, represented here by the blue axis markers. This blue curve, we want to see this gently curve over at the top. That's the flattening of the curve everyone's talking about. When this happens, this orange curve will drop down to zero, like what we're seeing here in Italy. For the United States, we're not seeing the number of new deaths per day drop. We're not seeing that flattening as a trend since April 14th. We haven't really gone much lower. In fact, yesterday with 2,612 deaths, or rather April 29th, that was the highest number of new deaths per day we've seen. When the number of new deaths per day goes down to zero, we've effectively flattened the curve. So let's look at the different states in America. New York is showing good progress in flattening this curve, this blue curve rather. The orange curve is dropping, not as quickly as it came up. In late March and early April, it was rising quite quickly. We'd like to see it drop a little bit more quickly. New Jersey has shown this oscillatory behavior that many states are showing, different numbers per day. Back on April 26th, there were 75. And then just a couple days later, there were almost 400 deaths on April 28th. Michigan is not showing a whole lot of progress in dropping this curve either. Massachusetts still increasing. Pennsylvania showed a spike and then a drop down to, on April 23rd, only 3 deaths. And now they're up to 300 on April 29th. Illinois also showing that behavior, still moving upwards. Connecticut looks to be dropping. Let's hope this trend continues and keeps going down. In general, if you look at the last sort of week, this orange line is not going down for many states at all. If anything, it's remaining constant. Connecticut is maybe the only outlier here, Connecticut and New York. Every other state is showing this large increase. Colorado showed a big spike back on April 24th of 115 deaths, and then the very next day, 0 deaths. So there's some behavior here happening in maybe how things are being recorded or how things are counting that are resulting in these big spikes that make it so that I really had to add in the red curve or the raw data so we could really see what's happening day to day. Let's switch over to the world view for a moment and look at how things are going internationally. Italy, again, is showing this drop. We want to see that go faster. It's a bit like the curve in New York, where it started gaining very quickly and then is slow to drop. So what I think we're seeing is that the flattening of the curve doesn't happen symmetrically the way I think a lot of scientists, including myself, expected it to. I thought that the rise would lead to some sort of a peak, and then it would drop the way it did for a little over a week here in Italy, and then keep dropping at that same rate. As we've seen over here in my simulation, when it doesn't drop at that rate, in other words, if we get another peak, let me just run this notebook here. If we get another peak in the orange curve, and let's say it's even a little bit lower so that the curve doesn't flatten, this blue curve doesn't flatten as quickly as we'd like, we end up with this light blue curve, which, again, if I just play with this orange curve a bit, introduce a 40% lag, this results in 36% more deaths. Let's go back to the countries and look at that again. So in the United States, we're showing a peak and then a drop and then another peak. Or in France, the way they're showing the same thing, Belgium is showing the same. This really does result in more deaths because the curve is flattening more more slowly, and the number of deaths will be higher. So if I try to simulate what I see there in Italy, where it's a peak and then another smaller peak there, let's see if we can get something that looks a little bit like that. Yeah, maybe something like this. Again, it's that 36% number. So it's not a good sign when the curve doesn't, this orange curve doesn't drop as quickly as we'd like. It results in a higher endpoint for the number of deaths, the blue curve. I want to compare a couple of countries for a moment. If we look here at the Netherlands, who seem to be dropping, but in this oscillatory way, and this might be due to some effect based on weekday. We see that Netherlands is dropping there right around 100 deaths per day, with almost 5,000 total deaths. And we think about a state right next door is Belgium with almost 7,600 total deaths. And start to think about the population. The reason I don't compare these countries by their population and look at per capita numbers can be illustrated by a simple example. The United States, when we first started experiencing deaths from COVID-19, if we had compared our numbers to Italy, especially in a per capita sense, it would have seemed like we had a very small problem and Italy had a very large problem. But now that we get more and more deaths, it's really difficult to compare per capita numbers unless you compare the start dates. So let's look at Belgium and Netherlands and look at the start dates. So let's find out when the Netherlands had 100 deaths. So if I look at the blue box that's popping up here, I can see that on March 20th, sometime between March 19th and on March 20th, they eclipsed 100 deaths at 107. And so if that's March 20th, when did it happen for Belgium? They eclipsed that number on March 24th. So from March 24th to March 20th, that's only 4 days. So within 4 days, we'd expect the response or the number of total deaths in Netherlands to be rather close to those in Belgium if the populations are the same, but they're not. Netherlands have just over 17 million, and let's look at the list of countries, whereas Belgium, on the other hand, where's Belgium here compared to the Netherlands, has just about 11.5 million. So from 17 down to 11.5. So with more people in the Netherlands, we'd expect more deaths, all things being equal, especially if the dates were the same of onset, and there roughly are. And so we can say then that the Netherlands is having a more favorable response than what's happening here in Belgium. And we're going to do a bit more of this type of analysis coming up when we can compare the per capita death rates. Sweden is another country to look at. Again, much more populous than some of their neighbors. They're showing a death rate increasing here, or at least not doing much to drop down very much. There's Sweden. Its neighbors are all the way down at the bottom, Finland and Norway. And there have been a lot of comparisons between the three countries. But if we look at Sweden here, let's find Sweden. There's Sweden with around 10 million people. And if we look at Norway, they're down here at half. And so it's really, and Finland is also really close to half as many people. So it's a tough comparison to make, but certainly Finland and Norway have many fewer than half of what Sweden has in terms of deaths. So around 200 for Norway and for Finland as of today. And again, all things being equal, we wouldn't expect Sweden to be at such a multiplier, which is, it's quite a bit higher than those other two countries. If we look at this being maybe 10 times more, where they're only 2 times the population. So the way countries are responding to COVID-19, the way they're reacting to it, the way they're empowering citizens is playing out in the stories that you see in these graphs. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you stay safe. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with more reports on the COVID-19 recoveries of countries and states. Thank you.